We got one guest here for this Monday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is professional handicapper Kyle Hunter of HunterSportsPicks.com for our Week 5 college football first look. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Doing well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me here. And look, man, it's Week 5. You feel like you wait forever for the season to start, and then all of a sudden we're 4 weeks and about I think it's a month tomorrow into the college football season, and we've already seen a lot. We've already been able to make a lot of determinations. So how did your weekend go, and what are you kind of taking away from what we saw?
Yeah, we're at 5-1-1 on Saturday with a free play winner as well. So definitely a really good Saturday for me from a sports betting standpoint. So happy to have a couple really good weekends here in college football. I always try to not get too high or too low because we know it's a really long season, but I've been seeing things pretty well so far, especially on the total side, but pretty decent on sides as well. But, to me, I thought it was a pretty interesting Saturday. I didn't get to watch as many games as I wanted to, kind of a family emergency with my son, but it was a interesting weekend to try to watch as much of the playbacks as I could. And I have to tell you that I wanted to watch it. I was excited to watch the Michigan and Wisconsin game. I didn't get to watch it, and apparently I didn't miss too much.
No, you really didn't. And, I mean, this is one I watched quite a bit. We wound up with Michigan plus 3.5 in the Golden Nugget. We went 5-2 in the Golden Nugget. That was one of the games that we lost, obviously. And, it was one of those games where right after it started, I just went, shit, I have the wrong side. It was instantaneous, and it's on me because when I watched Michigan against Army, and we talked about this on the show, Michigan's defensive line got pushed around by Army, and that shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be a thing. They got really pushed around in the trenches on both sides of the football. So I should have realized, hey, Wisconsin's going to do the same thing to them, and they did. I mean, Jonathan Taylor had 150 yards in the first quarter. Michigan's offense was a train wreck again. And you and I were talking about this, I think, via text while you were trying to catch as much of the game as you could. I was talking about this with other people, too. I just don't think Shea Patterson's that good of a quarterback. Maybe the weapons aren't there at Michigan, but he doesn't step up into the pocket. His footwork is terrible. His decision-making isn't real sound either. It's a bad state of affairs all the way around for the Wolverines. You and I are both Buckeyes fans, so it's hard for me to ever say anything good about Michigan, but it is kind of sad to see what they've become.
Yeah, and honestly, it's kind of better for Ohio State if Michigan's pretty good. Certainly want Ohio State to win that game if you're a Buckeyes fan like myself and yourself. But, I think it's better for Ohio State when Michigan is good. At this point, there's got to be a lot of questions about Harbaugh. The last few guys that came to Michigan kind of did the worst job at Michigan that they've done at any place, and it kind of makes you start wondering. I thought there were quite a few other takeaways from last weekend. I did get to watch a decent amount of Notre Dame and Georgia. Notre Dame really played pretty well for quite a bit of that game. I thought Notre Dame's defense was especially impressive, holding up against that Georgia run game at least, pretty well. To me, Notre Dame is one of those where, can you feel too good about a close loss? No, I don't think they can feel too good about it because, they actually really have a chance to win. But at the same time, Notre Dame did play fairly well in that one. I thought Auburn's win at Texas A&M impressed me. I think I've been a little bit too high on A&M. This is an A&M team that their offensive line just isn't quite good enough. And then also, when you sent me the message the other night, I admit to not knowing that Arkansas had lost to San Jose State. Definitely not a game I was following, but that's a new low for Arkansas.
Yeah, that's not a good look for Arkansas. And it's funny, too, I've had this conversation with Brad Powers a little bit, both on the air and off the air, that second-year coaches have really struggled this year. And Arkansas was a team I expected to kind of move forward a little bit with Chad Morris, and it just doesn't happen. And the irony of it, of course, is that SMU, where Chad Morris used to be, just knocked off TCU for the first time in 11 years. Or for the first time in 7 years, second time in the last 12 years. So, it's so interesting to look at these second-year coaches and expect these leaps and just not really get them. And with Texas A&M here, look, that game ended 28-20. So people may say, well, it was, fairly close. It wasn't. Texas A&M, 85, 69, 81 yards on their last 3 possessions of that game when Auburn was already up 21-3. So Texas A&M got a lot of garbage time yardage in that game. Auburn really dominated that game defensively. Yeah, Bo Nix has his issues, and yeah, it's going to make it tough for Auburn when they play, LSU and Alabama and teams like that. That was one of my biggest takeaways from this week is that Auburn defense just dominated Texas A&M. Regardless of what the box score for the full body of work says, that was a no contest for 3 quarters at least. So Auburn definitely impressed me last week.
Yeah, I mean, Auburn's defensive line is really good. I think they can dominate the offensive lines that aren't too great. I'm looking forward to seeing an Auburn defensive line up against some of the best offensive lines they'll play there in the SEC, and there are some good ones. That'll be some really good matchups. And I have to say, how about that late night insanity from UCLA and Washington State? Honestly, I didn't think there was going to be much of any reason to watch that game. And then I'm sitting up and seeing how the game's going. See, it's 49-17, Washington State. Flip back a few minutes later, and UCLA is about to take the lead. There's a second-year coach that, I don't know what to think of UCLA still because, a lot of things went their way in that game. I mean, the way Washington State was handing it over, I feel like that was more about Washington State giving it away than it was about UCLA picking up the win. But at the same time, this UCLA team has talent. Now they have some confidence. I'm really curious to see how they play these next couple weeks.
Yeah, so am I. I'm not really sure, what to make of that game because, as you mentioned, Washington State up so big, and UCLA scores 50 points in the second half. And again, this is a team that went into that game dead last in the country in yards per play on offense, which you would never expect with a Chip Kelly team. But then all of a sudden they rattle off 67 against Washington State. It was insanity. It was crazy. Of course, I was on Washington State in that game, so I'm happy. 49-17. Oh, this is great. Covering the big number, and then everything just goes completely haywire in that game. And it's interesting too because Washington State and Utah play each other this week, and this isn't a game we're going to go in depth on here today, but a game we will talk about throughout the week. Utah 6-point favorite. It was 5.5 this morning for a little bit. Those 5.5s are completely gone now. But those are two teams, and this is going to be a thing here the rest of the way in college football, now that we're into all this conference action, where you're going to play a tough conference game off of a really disappointing loss. And for Washington State and Utah, both of them are in that spot here with this game in Salt Lake City on Saturday. So keep an eye out for some of these intriguing situational spots, too, where you really have to try and gauge. I think Mike Leach is a really good head coach. I think Kyle Whittingham's a really good head coach. I think these two teams will be prepared. But there will be clear and obvious cases sometimes the rest of the way where teams just aren't going to be prepared. And now is a good opportunity to take advantage of some of those.
Yeah, that's a game that I won't be invested in anyway. I looked at that game a little bit last night. I make the line about what it's at right now, and I have to tell you that Utah was not impressive at all against USC. They had plenty of chances inside the 20, didn't do anything with them. But I thought that Utah was pretty disappointing. USC with a third-string quarterback, USC certainly better at home, and Clay Helton's had quite a few wins at home, not on the road, against good teams. But to me, still kind of surprising that Utah couldn't get over the top in that game. And I will say that we talked about this before the season. The Utah hype train did get out of control. So, you wonder if that might have kind of affected them. They really haven't played that great so far this year in general, because even their win against BYU kind of gave them quite a few points there at the start. So it'll be interesting to see how Utah plays the rest of the way.
Yeah, I did bump Utah down about 1.5 because Zach Moss is out, separated shoulder for him. So did bump Utah down about 1.5. My number's 4 on that game, but I was also low on last week's game. I had it USC +1. There's USC +3.5 or 4 out there. So maybe I already had Utah a little bit low, but yeah, that's the thing. That hype train, I think Utah is a very good team. I think they're a very well-coached team, but I just don't think that they're as good as their ranking, their power rating placement, their public perception. I just don't think they're as good. I don't think that their talent level kind of is in line with where people have them rated. So, well, I guess we'll see what happens here this week, especially against Washington State. And without Zach Moss, maybe their ability to take the air out of the ball a little bit, taken out of the equation some here against Washington State. So, will be a good game, and again, one that we'll talk about a lot here as we go throughout the week. But we're going to bring something back for you here today, something we haven't done too much of on the show. That's our quick hitters segment, kind of looking at some news and notes, some important nuggets, and then we've also got some regression numbers for you as well. So lots of good insights here at today's show before we get into the game breakdowns.
Yeah, I'll go pretty quick on these quick hitters. I mean, they are called quick hitters after all, but might take a little bit more time as we talk about the regression stats. So I'll just kind of mention these a little bit. LSU is third in explosive plays, 20 yards or more so far this year with 33. Their new offense really working very well with Joe Burrow as control. A very dangerous team. I think LSU with a really good offense could be very tough. Next one on my list here, Akron minus 18 in sack margin through 4 games. That's hard to do. I kind of looked at that and I had to make sure that was actually the case, and it is the case. Akron, I believe, has given up 20 sacks or allowed 20 sacks and has 2 sacks themselves. So not great there from the Zips. SMU, off a big upset of TCU this past weekend. SMU is only 15 of 20 on extra points this year. That's something to keep in mind because I think that's going to cost this team either a win or a cover here at some point if it keeps up. You can't only make 15 out of 20 extra points. I know they were worried about their kicking situation before the season. It has not gone well there. As far as penalties, I like to look at penalties fairly often. Some teams can really just shoot themselves in the foot quite a bit. Tulsa averaging 10.8 penalties per game for 95.3 yards. Easily worst in the country so far this year. The Louisiana Raging Cajuns, second in the nation in yards per carry at 7.53 yards per carry. That includes games against Mississippi State and Ohio. Ohio not a great defense. Mississippi State not what they were last year, but still I think that's very impressive that they can be averaging 7.53 yards per carry. Billy Napier's team is really efficient offensively. Very strong offensive line, a big reason why. I'm pretty impressed with what they've been doing at Louisiana. Final quick hitter I have is Hawaii, an absolute turnover machine. Minus 12 turnover margin so far already this year. 4 turnovers against Central Arkansas last week. This has really gotten out of control for Hawaii. This is going to be a problem if it keeps up, certainly. They've been able to win some games with negative turnover margins, but they can't keep doing that.
No, they definitely can't. And some really good notes there, and I'll just sort of run through here. The interesting thing about Akron being so far in the negatives in sack margin is that they have a very experienced starting quarterback in Cato Nelson. So what that suggests to me is that this offensive line is just beyond awful, just absolutely terrible. So when Akron plays teams with a decent defensive line, looks like a very good spot to go against the Zips, which there have been a lot of good spots to go against the Zips here so far this year. But that's the thing, Cato Nelson, and I know they're changing offenses. I know they've got Tom Arth, who was a quarterback. He's kind of an offensive-minded guy. But, again, it's very obvious here. They just don't have the offensive line. So that's something to keep in mind. Louisiana is really fascinating because they're a team I thought I was going to be higher than the market on coming into the season, and I've actually been playing catch-up with them. And, in fact, I've got their line a little bit low here this week. I believe they take on Georgia Southern. That line's Louisiana minus 3.5. I've got it about Louisiana minus a half, -1 in that range. So I'm still not high enough on Louisiana. Probably a team that I will need to make a big adjustment for as we head into Week 6, depending on how they do here this week against that Georgia Southern option. And the Hawaii thing, I mean, look, when you look around not just college football but the NFL, you can't turn the football over at a high rate. You just can't do it. And I know Hawaii, talented offense. They've got some guys. I wonder if this is one of those things where they really miss John Ursua because he's the guy that created a lot of separation for them. He was that possession-type receiver. Now you're throwing into tighter windows. You're probably taking some more shots because you're not a very good team to begin with. That's something that you sort of wonder. Obviously, a minus 12, you don't think that that's going to keep getting worse, but with the way that Hawaii plays, and they have lost 6 of their 8 fumbles this year, with the way that Hawaii plays, I don't see those interceptions going away.
Yeah, they have not shown anything that would make you think that it's going to go away anytime soon. So I'd be hesitant to back Hawaii here, whether it's this week or in the coming weeks, because they are going to have some tests, and it's hard to keep winning games that way. Hawaii certainly has potential to score a lot of points, and honestly, they could still score a lot of points even when they're turning it over because they're still explosive on offense. But to me, this is a Hawaii team that is not really that trustworthy, and I'm not going to be trusting them going forward. I think that they've kind of proven what they are, and until we see something different, I would expect quite a few turnovers from them.
I got a random question for you here. Just because I happen to look at this, I think it's interesting. There is one team in the country that has not allowed a sack yet. Who do you think it is?
Bama?
How about this? New Mexico. New Mexico is the only team in the country to not allow a sack yet. Air Force, UAB, Duke, and Georgia have all allowed 1. New Mexico has allowed 0. Alabama, by the way, 4 sacks allowed here so far in their games. But I thought that was certainly interesting. In New Mexico, for those that are looking at situational spots, and I will write this one up later on today, New Mexico beats New Mexico State in the rivalry game 55-52. Total back and forth affair. New Mexico goes on the road to Liberty, which is in Lynchburg, Virginia, for those that don't know. So a long trip here for the Lobos coming off of a rivalry week win. So there's a game you may want to keep in mind here for later on this week. All right, so let's look at these regression numbers. We got a lot of stuff to talk about here with regards to that because we finally have some sample sizes to the point where some of these things could be coming to fruition sooner rather than later, and these are definitely things that you want to look for as the season goes along.
Yeah, I thought now was a really good time to start looking at these more in depth. I've gotten some positive feedback about when we talked about these in the past. I think these are a good way to, kind of look for regression, and it's not necessarily going to come in one game. But, if you look over the course of the season, some of these things aren't going to keep happening. So if a team's done well ATS or done poorly ATS, you expect things to come back toward the mean. It's definitely something to keep in mind. Illinois, I'll start with 13 touchdowns and 15 trips into the red zone. Their opponents have 7 touchdowns and 14 trips into the red zone. Illinois, while they do have some talent and they're capable of pulling an upset, they're looking a little bit better than what they are so far this year. And, they had a game that was misleading last weekend with Nebraska, and I think some of these numbers make it look like Illinois is going to come back down to earth.
Speaking of that game, 42-38, Nebraska wins that game. So if you just look at the score and also see that Nebraska had outscored Illinois 15-3 in the fourth quarter to win that game by 4, if you just look at the score or the quick summary, something like that, you're going to miss a lot. Nebraska outgained Illinois in that game 671-299. They outgained Illinois 327-78 through the air. Nebraska ran for 344 yards. In fairness, Illinois did run for 221 on 38 carries, so almost 6 yards per carry, but Nebraska lost 4 fumbles in that game. So they were -3 in turnover margin. Illinois was 1 for 12 on third down. Nebraska was 11 for 19. Nebraska had 18 more first downs. So again, they outgained Illinois by 370 yards, won the game by 4 points because of turnovers. So again, box score study, critically important to say the least. By the way, Nebraska, most lost fumbles in the country.
Yeah, I think there is one stat that kind of stands out to me from what you just said there, though, is Nebraska gave up so many yards per carry. They're going to have to do a lot better this weekend against Ohio State. I think that line move there from the beginning probably was the right line move on Ohio State. Certainly not a great spot for Ohio State, but Ohio State looks very good, running the football very well. If Nebraska can't stop Illinois running the football, I would be concerned about their defense in that one. Northern Illinois has scored a touchdown only 1 of their 6 trips into the red zone so far this year. I think Northern Illinois' offense is a bit better than they have looked so far. Now, let's not get carried away and say that I think Northern Illinois' offense is good. It's just, 1 out of 6 trips into the red zone, you scored a touchdown. things are likely to improve.
The thing that worries me the most about that is that they've only been to the red zone 6 times in 3 games. And I know that they've played a couple of solid teams, but the other teams with 6 red zone trips in 3 games, Georgia Tech, who's changing from an option to, I guess, a pro-style offense or whatever you want to call it, and Middle Tennessee, who lost everything quarterback Brent Stockstill and has also lost some really good receivers over the last few years. So that's a problem for Northern Illinois. And again, like I said, they've played some pretty decent teams. I understand that they've played, Nebraska and Utah. So they played, Power 5 level competition, certainly going to be better going into the MAC. So that may be something you want to look at here. When they play the bottom of the MAC, maybe some get-right games at reduced prices because of how they've looked so far.
Yeah, I think that's definitely could be an opportunity. Minnesota, 106th in yards per play, 47th in points per game so far this year. They're also 101st in the nation in yards per play margin, minus 0.55 yards per play, but they're 3-0. I think Minnesota is probably better than they've looked so far this year. But at the same time, what's the market going to think of them here now that they're 3-0, but all of their numbers behind the scenes don't look very good? I'm pretty fascinated to see about Minnesota here going forward. I will say this weekend's game is a pretty big question mark based on injuries, but going forward, Minnesota could be a tough team to back.
That was the question I had about Minnesota coming into the season was, their offensive efficiency. I mean, they never really found a quarterback last year, and I still don't think that they really have one. So now they take on Purdue this week, then Illinois, then things ramp up a little bit with Nebraska, although that game is at home. That's the thing. A lot of people like this Minnesota team coming into the season, and it's not even just, the fact that they're not really being all that efficient on offense. It's that it's hidden by the fact that they've still scored over 100 points in their 3 games. So they may be a pretty decent fade team here because, again, perception was relatively high on them coming into the year.
Yeah, I think they could be a decent fade team. Maybe even look to play some unders if you think their defense is going to do enough, because this offense has not been good, and yet they've scored quite a few points thanks to short fields and things like that. Temple, 4th in the nation in yards per play allowed, 49th in points per game allowed. Definitely a good defense for Temple. Rod Carey's teams typically have a good defense. And if you look at a lot of the metrics as far as, regression statistics, Temple looks like they're a better team than what they have kind of showed so far. I did have Buffalo in that game the other day. I know Buffalo was fortunate to have as many turnovers from Temple as they did, but Temple couldn't really do much on offense in that game either. So I was certainly surprised that Buffalo won outright. I think it was a really bad spot for Temple, though. I think Temple was looking forward to this weekend's game, and I would say, to be honest with you, I think Temple's probably more of a team I'd rather buy than sell at this point. I think the Temple's defense has proven that they're very good. Temple's offense, decent as well. I think Temple could be a good team to back.
That Temple game this week is really intriguing. Of course, taking on former head coach Jeff Collins, who's now at Georgia Tech. That is an interesting one, especially because last week's 38-22 game was misleading. Temple was only 2 for 16 on 3rd down, turned it over on downs 4 times, had 4 turnovers otherwise with interceptions and fumbles. So, was that an indictment of Temple's offense? Was that just one of those games where a lot of things happens? I don't know. I'm going to be really interested to see how Temple does bounce back here this week. And again, they are a 10-point favorite against Georgia Tech, but something did feel off about last week's game, and I'm glad that you had the stones that I didn't have to take Buffalo in that game.
Yeah, I mean, usually I don't do terribly well with those big underdogs, and it was nice to see one of them not only cover but win outright. I do think Temple this weekend, I would lean toward Temple, and I'm kind of upset with myself that I didn't pick them minus 8.5. I think that this is a good bounce-back spot for them. That's one that I'll be looking at a little bit more here throughout the course of the week. The USC defense, opponents 20 trips into the red zone and 7 touchdowns, 35%. Look, this is not sustainable. Utah did everything they could to not score last weekend. USC, give them credit for making some big plays there in the red zone, but there were sometimes that Utah had some confusing play calls there, at the half-yard line. Snapping it in the shotgun, kind of taking your time running around and then getting hit for a 5-yard loss. Confusing play calls from Utah. USC's defense is not going to do as well as they have in the red zone. The question is how USC's offense going to look. Obviously we don't know who the quarterback's going to be the next couple weeks. But, Graham Harrell, good offensive coordinator, definitely improved on that end. But just make sure you know that USC's defense is going to start giving up some more points. They can't keep doing this 7 TDs and 20 trips.
Well, and that'll be the interesting thing to watch here as we go forward. And maybe USC is an over team on a game-by-game basis here going forward because that touchdown percentage is going to negatively regress against them. And I think as Graham Harrell keeps getting his fingerprints on this offense, that Trojans offense could get a little bit better too. So maybe they are a little bit of an over team the rest of the way.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think their wide receivers are really good. USC's wide receivers, the strength of their team, and when you have as good of an offensive mind as Harrell, I think that they will be pretty good on offense. Boston College, I was looking at this team pretty closely yesterday when I was making my notes. I think they have to be the luckiest team in the country so far this year. They're +9 in turnover margin. They have 4 fumbles, and they've lost none of them. They've forced 4 fumbles, and they've recovered 3, so plenty of fumble luck. Then you've got Boston College -0.22 yards per play margin, 90th in the country, and yet they're 3-1. And we know what their one loss was, which is certainly not impressive at all. I think Boston College, a team that I would want to go against. The thing I wanted to point out also, though, is that you can tell that the market sees these regression signs. Look at what Wake Forest opened and look what the line is up to against Boston College now. So obviously, we're not the only ones thinking about regression statistics, but this kind of points out that it's very helpful to look at things like this.
Totally agree. And in fact, I think that this number at Circa was actually Wake Forest -3, and now it's up to -7 out there. It is 7 plus money or even money, but they're finding it very difficult here early in the week to find anybody that wants to back Boston College. Open 4.5 in the offshore marketplace. So I agree. That's one where people have isolated Boston College as a fade team, and it also goes in hand with the fact that Wake Forest has been better than anybody thought, and Jamie Newman's been really good for that Dave Clawson offense. But, yeah, I agree. These are things, again, box score study, and then looking for these regression signs. You're going to get out in front of line moves. Even if you can't put together power ratings or you don't feel comfortable with your numbers or something like that, get out in front of the market with box scores and these regression stats. You're going to get some line value here the rest of the way.
Definitely so. Colorado, 98th in the nation in yards per play margin, -0.5 yard per play, 3-1 on the year. Colorado's fortunate to be 3-1 this year. We know that they were fortunate to win that game against Nebraska. Arizona State coming off a really big win at Michigan State, didn't play too well in that one. They won another close game there. They gave up a lot of yards to Colorado State even, and then we know they had the close overtime loss against Air Force, where Air Force really was the better team throughout the course of the game. I think Colorado's a bit overvalued at this point.
I think so, too. And 2 very important injury situations to keep an eye on for Colorado as well. They are on a bye this week, so I guess if you're going to have injuries, now is not a bad time for it. But Laviska Shenault, he's been banged up all year. He actually left the game against Arizona State very early on. Then defensive end Mustafa Johnson, who's the best player on that side of the ball for a defense that already isn't very good. He was in a walking boot for the second half of that game. So keep that in mind coming out of the bye here with the Buffaloes. They host Arizona next week, but they're dealing with some pretty significant injuries here so far, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Those are really, really key injuries for Colorado. If those guys can't play, they'll be much worse going forward. Iowa State, -2 turnover margin so far this year, 10th in the nation in yards per play margin. I really think Matt Campbell's team is better than most people think. So just kind of wanted to say be careful not to be too low on them from the Northern Iowa near miss and then the tough loss to Iowa. So I think Iowa State's going to have a good season.
Yeah, and the funny thing is I think they started both of their drives on Saturday with turnovers and then still hung 72 points. So that is a team that I felt like kind of a get-right spot for the Cyclones. I wish I would have played it. I certainly gave it a lot of thought, and my number was 22.5, so it was higher than the market, and they wound up taking care of business there. Yeah, not a game we're going to talk about here today, but one we will talk about throughout the week. Iowa State and Baylor looks like a really interesting game. And once again, you mentioned line moves based on some of these signs of positive or negative regression. Iowa State up from -1 to -2.5 for that road game in Waco.
Yeah, definitely one where I think that's the right right move there. Baylor has not looked too great here lately. They had a close win there against Rice. I know they kind of shut it down in the second half, but still, I think Iowa State's a better team than Baylor. The question is, what's the home field advantage worth, and can Baylor turn it around here? I would agree with that line move there on Iowa State. I wanted to talk about a little bit of fumble love, good and bad, and I'll go through these a little quicker, in the interest of time. Illinois, for 8 fumbles, has recovered 7. There's all kinds of regression signals here for Illinois, so going forward, I would look to go against them. Wake Forest has fumbled at 6 times and only lost 1 of them. Wake Forest has certainly been good this year. Newman, very, very good. But I think this Wake Forest team has been a little bit fortunate, so we'll see about them going forward. Pittsburgh has forced 5 fumbles and has recovered 0 of them. So Pittsburgh on defense hasn't been able to force that turnover and actually recover the fumble. Washington State fumbled 4 times, lost all 4. I don't know offhand how many of those were last week, but had to be several of them. They had some pretty unlucky-looking turnovers last weekend. I think Washington State's probably in for some positive regression when it comes to turnover margin. I'm
checking it right now because I believe it was all 4 of them were in that game on Saturday. It was all 4. They had 6 turnovers in that game. So Washington State, -5 in turnover margin in that game. They had 6 turnovers, plus they turned it over on downs, which doesn't actually go into the books as a turnover. So essentially 7 turnovers, and they scored 63 points and lost. It has to be one of the craziest games that's ever been played. It's just insanity.
9 touchdown passes and you lose. It's hard to believe.
700 yards and you lose.
Yeah.
And 7 turnovers, essentially. Unbelievable. College football is it's sometimes it's just nuts, and sometimes you can't explain it either. That's the hardest part, is that if you told me I have Washington State -18.5, they're going to gain 700 yards and have 9 touchdown passes, I would have lost my house because I would have put it up on the line.
Yeah.
It's crazy. All right, so as we look at some other systems and angles here, conference play. This is the time where a lot of conferences getting into conference play. The schedule's been kind of effed up a little bit this year because some teams started with a conference game in week 1. Now they're getting back to them in week 5, or maybe got back to them in week 4. Played a conference game in week 2 and then 2 non-conference opponents. So it's been a little bit crazy, but there are some systems and angles here, maybe related to conference play, maybe not, to keep an eye on here as teams get into the middle of the schedule.
Yeah, I like to look for some of these. I know that a lot of listeners like things like this to try to find some systems or angles that may be good looks here for a week or two. I'm looking at game number 4 through game number 6 of the season for teams with a 25% or less ATS cover rate against teams with a 75% ATS cover rate or higher are 151 and 113. That's 57.2% since 2005. If you narrow that down a little bit by adding a filter of team is receiving 40% or less of the spread bet, so basically they're out of favor, and the angle becomes 110 and 66, 62.5%. Now, I will say I don't love betting things just because, the spread bets are at 40% or lower or anything like that. But I do think when it's combined with a reason like this, that the team has been really poor ATS and they're likely going to regress to the mean at least a little bit, I think it makes quite a bit of sense.
Yeah, and this is one of those cases where, again, you get these teams that start off bad. We've talked about this before with teams that lose to FCS opponents. When they start off bad, everyone just discards them, just throws them away, doesn't want to back. I can't bet that team. Well, you can, and you probably should, because those lines are going to be inflated, whether the market does it or just, from a power rating standpoint it happens, something like that. Those teams that aren't covering against teams that are covering, you're going to get some line inflation in there. And again, if it's an undesirable team, a team that people are treating like a colony of lepers, then yeah, those are the types of teams that you want to go on. And that is very important to do here in the middle of the year. And it's funny because we talk about overreactions week 1 to week 2, week 2 to week 3. This trend right there suggests that overreactions still happen over the course of the season.
Right. I think that's a really good point. And if you think about it, this is the time that if you want to go on those teams, bet on those teams that haven't done well ATS, now's a better time to do it than later in the season. And we can look at this again as we get later in the season, but some of those teams give up at some point. Usually they don't give up in, games 4, 5, or 6. So I think this was a good time to point out something like that. And then I will say, in weeks 5 and 6 of the season, a game where both teams have seen more than 50% of their games go over the total, the under is 148 and 107 in the last 255, so 58% unders. And actually the other way it works out as well. It's not as strong of an angle the other way, but this is just a sign of overreactions in the total market. So, kind of two angles here that point out that this time of the year is still good to look for those overreactions.
Well, and speaking of things working both ways, to circle back to the ATS trend real quickly, again, that team that may be, 1 and 3, that's 25% or less ATS, that may be a team that people really liked coming into the season that didn't live up to expectations, but we know they're still a good team. And that's why you don't ever want to completely discard your summer research and your summer work unless it's just blatantly obvious or there are injuries. But that'll happen too. A team's going to have, maybe Utah is just an easy example to talk about, but there was all that Utah hype, and they're not part of this trend because they're not 25% or less ATS, but people are going to go, well, Utah's not that good. Kind of like what I already did, and maybe sometimes that opinion is wrong. FIU may be a good example of this, where a lot of us thought FIU is going to be a pretty good team. They're bringing everybody back. They're bringing Morgan back, and they're off to a terrible start against it. I don't think they've covered a game yet against the spread, and everyone knows how that Louisiana Tech game wound up over the weekend. But that's probably a team where if you can stomach it, now's probably the time to get on them because, yeah, they're off to a very bad start, but this is still mostly the same team from last year, same talent, same coaching staff. You've got to figure they turn it around here at some point. So, that trend works both ways too. Either a team that was really bad, lost to an FCS team, something like that, or a team people expected to be pretty good that has just laid a lot of eggs so far.
Yeah, and let me tell you, just to help out the listeners here, as I was looking at this angle, I was looking to see which teams actually fit the criteria for this week as far as the weeks 4 through 6 and the game number 4 through 6 and the 25% or less up against a team that's covered. That's the trick. Is it's got to be a team that's covered 75% or higher ATS. Colorado State is one of them against Utah State, Nebraska against Ohio State, and Northwestern against Wisconsin. So not sure that I'll actually play any of those. Those don't kind of jump off the page at me as ones that I really want right away. Northwestern getting that many points is a little bit tempting off that Wisconsin win, but those are the three that kind of match the criteria.
Well, and you think about it too. I mean, they're playing three, in a relative sense, elite teams. Wisconsin's a clear top 10 team here. They're a 24-point favorite. We know Ohio State's a top 5 team. They're a 17.5-point favorite. And then Colorado State playing probably the best team in the Mountain West, and Utah State, they're a 20.5-point favorite. So those three teams, if let's say they're at 50% ATS, or let's say they've played a little bit better, are those numbers as big as they currently are? Probably not. I mean, I imagine Ohio State, Nebraska over the summer was, 10, maybe 9, 8, 7, I don't even know. But it sure as hell wasn't 17.5. So
right.
There probably is some. Now, Ohio State may go out there and just blow the doors off of them like they have everybody else. But that is a line that is very clearly inflated. I think the Wisconsin line is inflated too, although watching Northwestern's offense just makes me want to gouge my eyes out. It's awful.
I was going to say the same thing. I was going to say I think that the Wisconsin line is inflated some, but I'm not sure. I mean, can Northwestern score? I mean, I don't know if they'll score 10 points in that game. So you have to try to figure out how many do you think Wisconsin's going to score in that one. That'll be a low total game, and it's always tempting to try to take the points in that kind of game, but you wonder how much Northwestern can score there.
All right, so let's take a look at some of these games here, and I will readily admit I don't understand this line move here in Thursday's game. I'm always high on Memphis. I've been very low on Navy the last couple of years in the AAC, but this line's down from 12.5 to 10.5 on Thursday night, and I don't get it. I don't see it with Navy. Memphis has been really strong. They're very efficient offensively. maybe you have a dissenting opinion here, but I don't get this line move at all.
I do not have a dissenting opinion here. I will say, if you want to argue the other side, which I'm not going to do, Navy has done really well against Memphis. They've had a lot of success against this team. I know it's not, all the same players or even the same coaching staffs, but Navy's done very well against Memphis. I will say, I think this Memphis team defensively is better than they've been in the past. They're 7th in yards per play allowed so far this year. Certainly they've played a very weak schedule so far, but they're definitely better on defense. Navy's triple option attack, hard to prepare for, but Memphis had extra time here to get ready. Navy has only had a couple games here, and their numbers look good defensively, but they have faced Holy Cross and East Carolina. So I know Navy's defense isn't good. The secondary is a big question mark. I honestly think that Navy will have a really hard time stopping Memphis here. I like Memphis in this one. I don't really like going against Navy because they slow the game down so much. You don't get as many possessions. I hate laying points, but if this one gets down to 10, I will definitely take it. Even at this price, it's one that I'm strongly considering. I do like Memphis here. I think that maybe people are overvaluing how much the recent games between these two mean, because I think this Memphis team is better than they've been in past seasons.
Yeah, you do look here. I mean, the last 4 years, these two teams have played. Navy is 3-1. Memphis has been held to 30 points or less in all 4 of those games. And Navy did hang a couple of 40 burgers in the first 2 meetings between these two. But this is the thing, is that, look, last year, if I remember correctly, and I'm going to have to go back and check this now, I feel like Memphis just completely outplayed Navy. And they just got, I don't know if it was turnovers or it was something like that where
yeah.
I mean, it's a game that they 100% should have won. I don't remember exactly what happened. Try to look it up here on the fly. But like you said, I mean, that's the thing, is that I think Memphis is a different team. I think Memphis is a better team here this year. And also Navy is just, they're going in the wrong direction here as part of this conference. People are more prepared for that triple option. They've had it to the point where, other teams are starting to move the football a lot more on them because they see this Navy defense every year. They know what to do with what that Navy scheme brings to the table. So, I just think this is one of those spots where, I mean, I like Memphis in this one. Memphis was -3 in turnover margin last year, did outgain Navy 378 to 316, and Navy had the ball for 42-47. Navy ran 80 plays to Memphis's 49. So, yeah, Memphis had trouble getting off the field, but also the -3 in turnovers really did hurt them. So, I think last year's game was a little bit misleading. I think Memphis takes this game seriously. I like Memphis here. I mean, my number is more like 19. So this is far and away my biggest overlay of the week. Maybe I have Navy power rated incorrectly, but I already took the 11.5, and I just like Memphis.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you here. I may be on Memphis here myself. I'm -14.5 on Memphis. I'm likely higher on Navy than you are. But I wanted to say about last year's game. I remember that game pretty well. That game was played in a rainstorm, a lot of wind, not good conditions. Memphis was bothered by that a lot. And like you said, they still outgained them, especially from a yards per play margin. They were much better than that. So I think that was a pretty misleading game.
Oh, that's right. That was the remnants of one of the hurricanes, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, that's right. Because I remember, we did talk about that game a lot and talked about how much it would probably help Navy to play in conditions like that. I remember watching the game, and I remember the play calling, and I'm just sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, what? Like, Darrell Henderson had 212 yards on 13 carries, and Memphis still threw the ball 25 times against 24 runs, and I'm just like, why? Like, you can't throw the football. Not only was it wind, and we talk about wind having more of an impact than rain, I mean, that field looked like a swamp. It was a mess.
Yep.
You're right. I remember that game very, very vividly now. And again, I mean, is Memphis going to be able to put its best foot forward in a game like that? Absolutely not. So all things considered equal with the weather here, and we'll have to check this throughout the week. But, I mean, I think this is Memphis' spot. I really, truly do. And we'll see if we get some buyback here in this number. Speaking of buyback, I don't know if we're going to get any in game 105-106 here. Duke and Virginia Tech. This is one where Circa got caught a little bit. Duke was about a 6-point underdog at the opener. Opened 4 offshore, and it didn't matter. It still went down through 3. Virginia Tech, a 2.5-point home favorite here against Duke. And Yeah, this says something about how good Quentin Harris has been. It says something about how David Cutcliffe is. It also says a lot about how Virginia Tech has just dramatically fallen off.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Circa opened -6.5, and now 2.5 there on Virginia Tech. You know, Virginia Tech, I have a lot of questions about this program. They really need to get their act together. Fuente was thought to be a home run hire. Good first year there. He was really underachieved since. Virginia Tech 2-9 ATS in their last 11 games. You know, I don't know what to make of this team anymore. You know, they should have been a lot better this year. Maybe they will still be. Maybe they're one of those teams that would be undervalued now. We'll see. I will say David Cutcliffe, very, very good coach. We know that. Cutcliffe's Duke team since 2013 are 23-11-1 ATS as an underdog. So he's been very good as an underdog. Virginia Tech has the better talent here, but not playing well. I know Duke is really well coached. They've played a much tougher schedule so far this year. Both teams were off last weekend. You know, Virginia Tech converting on 52.17% of third downs, and they're still only averaging 27.84 points per game. So even though they're converting over 50% of their third downs, they still haven't been able to score very much, which is pretty interesting. I will say for several years now, the thing that's really stood out to me about Virginia Tech is they have no running game, no balance on offense. It's tough to win against good teams if they know what's coming every time, or if they don't have to respect your run game. So if they can't get better on offense in the run game, I don't think Virginia Tech is going to improve too much. This is not really a game I want to bet all that much. I will say if the line goes back up, I would consider playing Duke. Maybe this one will get back up to 3. There's certainly a chance. Maybe 3.5. I don't think it'll get back to where it started, certainly. But, you know, I'm not interested in betting Virginia Tech. I want to see what they can do before I try to back them. It's almost like, you know, at this point you wonder if you're trying to catch a falling knife, you know, and this is a spot where we're going to find out a lot about both of these teams. I think Duke, you know, we know what they are more than what we know, whether we know what Virginia Tech is. Do we know what they are? I'm not really sure. I did think that Fuente would do a good job here. Lately, things have not gone well. The defense, which has been very good, not doing very well either. So I think Duke can run on Virginia Tech here. So if Duke can run on them, if you get over 3, my lean would certainly be Duke here.
And the Virginia Tech offensive issues are one thing, but the defensive issues are another. I mean, Bud Foster's defense has just not been good the last couple of years, and he's probably stepping away at the right time because I'm sure he doesn't really know how to fix what's going on here. I mean, you would think with a guy like Fuente that the recruiting would be on par or better than what Frank Beamer was pulling in. Again, I mean, Virginia Tech, they still translate guys from the college ranks to the NFL, but there's just something – I don't know if it's schematic. I don't know what it is with this Virginia Tech defense, but they're just not that impressive anymore. You know, Blacksburg is not the daunting place it used to be to go and play a game, and it'll be lively here on Friday night to be sure, but still, I never have any confidence in Virginia Tech. And Duke, I mean, yeah, they lose Daniel Jones, but Quentin Harris, a dual threat type of guy, tough guy to prepare for, and maybe that's something we need to focus on a little bit more. You know, if you're a pocket passer and that's all you can do, you may be able to put up great numbers, but if those throwing lanes and windows aren't there, you're going to struggle because you can't do anything else. You know, some of these dual threat quarterbacks in college, I think they just make a world of difference, and Quentin Harris could just be that guy for Duke.
He might be. I mean, I think we'll find out more here. And like I said, I just can't back Virginia Tech. I wouldn't want to back Duke at plus 2.5. So if the line gets higher, I will consider taking Duke here. I certainly like Memphis more than I like this game, though.
All right, so we move on Friday here to Penn State and Maryland. Kind of an interesting game to talk about here. Both of these teams off of some extra rest. And, you know, I think it's really hard to accurately gauge both of these teams. Penn State got outplayed by Pitt for a decent amount of that game a couple of weeks ago. Maybe they lose if Pat Narduzzi has any idea of basic game theory. Maybe they still win the game anyway. I don't know. Maryland, 2 impressive wins to start the year, then lose to Temple, who, as we just mentioned, lost to Buffalo by 16 last weekend. So I don't know what either one of these two teams are heading into this game.
I think this is an interesting game, and it's a tough one to bet. You've got strength versus strength with Maryland's great ground attack, 5.99 yards per carry, against Penn State's run defense, 1.91 yards per carry allowed. Who wins that battle? I think that's really key. Penn State 12 for 12 scoring in the red zone so far this year. That should regress. Both teams only have 2 turnovers so far this season. Maryland's gotten more aggressive sending blitzes this season. Read some articles about the fact that they are really trying to key in on just being very aggressive on defense. They have 13 sacks so far this year. Can Clifford and Penn State passing game make them pay? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. So I think that's an unknown. I'm curious to see what kind of total we get here. I think maybe 56.5, 57, somewhere in there. Penn State's a team I'd rather play unders with. Maryland's a team I'd rather play overs with. So a tough game to bet, and I don't have anything strong here.
Well, and it's so funny, too, because every week in college football, you get the transitive property. Penn State beats Pitt. Well,
Right.
Pitt just beat UCF. And a lot of us looked at that spot for UCF last week and thought it was a very difficult one. I thought they were inflated over the win, or off the win over Stanford, because Stanford they had no interest in that game whatsoever. Did wind up coming to fruition. Pitt does win the game outright on a gadget play on 4th down, ironically enough, of course. But that's the thing now, is people are going to look at Penn State's win over Buffalo and say, well, they beat them badly. Yeah, but they were trailing at halftime in that game. Oh, they beat Pitt. Pitt just beat UCF. Yeah, but UCF's not as good as we thought. That's the hard part for me is I don't know exactly where Penn State is because they had no business looking as bad in the first half against Buffalo as they did. Wasn't a bad spot. Wasn't a look-ahead. I mean, I guess it was a little bit of a look-ahead spot, but you're a 17-point favorite against Pitt. It's not a look-ahead spot. Get your business, take care of business, and get out of there. And they had a hard time doing that. So I don't know what Penn State is right now. I know they're not a top 15 team, as the polls would suggest, even though I have them in that type of area for my power ratings. I've actually got them 17th. But that's the question I have. I think we find out who Penn State is this week.
I think so, too. I think Penn State is a little bit overvalued right now. Penn State has a good defense, especially against the run. So we're going to find out if Maryland can run against them. I think Penn State, if you want to move the ball on them, you have to be able to pass it at least pretty well. I don't know that Penn State's offense is going to be able to do too much over the course of the Big Ten season, though. So I think this is a Penn State team that there are quite a few unknowns about. Maryland, I don't know what to make of them either because I was too low on them coming into the season. And then I'm kind of just hesitant to take anything in their games for a while. So definitely a game I'd rather stay away from.
So this game is strange. Arizona State and Cal, game 111, 112, Friday night Pac-12 after dark. We know Pac-12 after dark can get real weird, as we just saw last week with UCLA and Washington State. This one, Cal was as high as a 5.5-point favorite, and then it went down this morning, and now it's sitting 3 with extra juice or 3.5. I really thought Cal would be the well-defined side here, but there's some hijinks going on with this line early in the week. Maybe massaging of the markets, maybe Arizona State undervalued, maybe Cal overvalued. I don't know what's going on with this game. I thought it would be clear one-sided with Cal getting the love, but I guess not.
Yeah, I mean, come on, guys. Cal was the final Pac-12 national title contender, right?
God.
So poor Pac-12. I mean, it's hard not to kick him around a little bit, but the Cal secondary is very good. I think if you're going to beat Cal, you're going to have to do it on the ground. The problem for me is Arizona State's no good on the ground. 3.21 yards per carry so far this year. I'm a little bit surprised that they're that bad, and part of it is they played against Michigan State, and that hurt their numbers there. But also Arizona State, I will say, 5 touchdowns and 13 trips into the red zone. So you would think they would start scoring some more points. The lack of a power running game, though, does hurt in the red zone. So we'll see going forward. Cal has allowed 14 sacks so far this year. Arizona State's allowed 11. Who can keep their quarterback upright here? Certainly would expect a very low total. I wrote this down last night, likely 39 or so. I see BetOnline is exactly at 39. They put out a few of these weeknight games totals, but I can't take under 39. Everything has to go right for under 39 to win. 41, 42, very key numbers. I can't take under 39. I do think this will be a low-scoring game. I don't have any strong lean on this game either. I have to say that, at 5 or 5.5, I would have leaned Arizona State. At this number, I have no lean at all.
This game is bouncing around again now, where it's up to 5.5 in other places. Again, this is one I don't know what's happening. Maybe the odds screen's maybe there's some sort of hiccup with the odds screen that I'm looking at. But this game's been all over the map already here this week, and I guess that things are just probably going to get crazier and crazier here on Friday. But I love that you mentioned Cal being the last Pac-12 national championship contender. Look, all joking aside, I mean, their defense is phenomenal. We know that. But all of a sudden, Chase Garbers looks like a real college football quarterback. Like, they're actually improving on offense, too. So they're kind of a dangerous team now because, again, even if the offense falters, you're not going to get a great margin for error against that defense. And if the offense is getting better, I mean, that can only help them. Maybe Cal is a pretty good team here this year.
Maybe. I will say this is pretty stunning to see this line go from 3.5 to 5.5, even Bovada showing 6.5. Quite the line move there. I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't know if there was some kind of injury or anything like that. But that's some pretty serious team. I have to say that, I do think that the bar was set pretty low for a Cal at quarterback. So, I mean, they just needed a decent quarterback because before it's just been turnover machines. So if they could just take care of the football, the defense is good enough to win a lot of games. I think Cal is a solid team, not a really good team, and they're certainly going to lose some games this year in the Pac-12. So, this is a hard one for me because I think both of these teams are kind of similar. Maybe Cal's a little bit better than Arizona State, but I think both of these teams are going to have some good games, some bad games. They're kind of in the middle of the pack somewhere. This is not a game I'm interested in betting.
I love this. I'm sitting here looking at I'm watching the screen at BetOnline, and they're -3, -140 on Cal. Like, just go to 3.5.
Right.
Whatever. All right. So as we look at the rest of the board here, and again, I mean, that's a game that we'll talk about, I'm sure, throughout the week some more. We got a listener request, and I thought our listeners liked us. I thought that they appreciated the work that we put out. I thought that they, enjoy listening to us on a weekly basis, and they want to torture us. At least one of our listeners out there wants to torture us by talking about Akron and UMass, game 133, 134. Akron, a 6-point favorite for the trip over to the East Coast. Has there been a worse game in college football the last 3-4 years?
I can't remember it. I really can't. And I will say when I texted you that last night when I got that message, I was curious to see what you're going to say back. I was just saying I got a request about Akron and UMass, and I'm curious. Okay, what's Adam going to say about this? And I have to say though that there are two ways looking at this. You could say that our listeners want to torture us, and it seems like we're nice enough guys. Do we really have to do this? But at the same time, I think it's pretty cool too, because this is one of the only shows you're ever going to hear talk about Akron and UMass, and I think that that's one of the things that really Bang the Book's done a really good job of is talking about these under the radar, and I guess you could say this is under the radar, off the radar, or something like that. But when I look at this game, I kind of like Akron here, and it scares me. I don't want to lay the points here with Akron, but UMass is so bad. I mean, they are really, really bad. Coastal Carolina is not exactly an offensive juggernaut. They had 636 yards of offense. They had 42 points at halftime. I think Akron needs to throw the ball often here. UMass, not much of a pass rush, so you would kind of hope that Nelson gets to stay upright most of the game here. UMass is giving up 11 yards per pass so far this year. That's worse in the country. It's not close. Akron has no running game, 130th last in the country in yards per carry. As long as Akron knows that they need to throw the ball consistently here, I think they can win this game, likely cover this game. I will say it's hard to bet this game, and I will say I would lean to the over in this game as well. I would think that UMass will be able to score on a bad Akron defense, but this is a interesting game, and I can't back UMass. I mean, you look at all of UMass's numbers; they are just atrocious.
Well, it's funny because you look at this UMass defense. You just mentioned 11 yards per attempt. They're still not as bad as UConn's defense from last year, at least not as of yet. So there's still that. So we want to give some love to the Huskies here too. I will say this. UMass is the lowest power-rated team I've ever had. And if they get blown out here, I'm probably going to have to adjust them down even more to the point where, like, if they played Alabama on neutral, they'd be like a 65-point underdog. So there is that worth considering here. The thing of it is, my number here is Akron -3. And I also have Akron really bad. They're number 128 in my power ratings. They're actually tied with UConn for the second worst team in the country. So I can't lay the 6 here. But taking UMass seems impossible. Now, I will say this. If you're UMass, you go into this game knowing this is your last and only chance at a win. So there is that. If you want to win a game, it damn well better be this one because you're not getting another one. So there is that factor to it. Also, laying 6 with Akron on the road, a team that, as you mentioned already, I mean, they're going in the wrong direction with those 20 sacks. That's a problem, too. I don't know if UMass can rush the quarterback at all whatsoever here. But the thing about it is this. I wonder what's going on behind the scenes at UMass. You've got a new head coach in Walt Bell. I don't know if this is just a transitional year. I don't know if this is just a complete and utter lack of talent. I don't know if this is all the things that are going on with UMass, maybe going back to FCS. They don't really want to be affiliated with a conference. There's all kinds of different stuff going on there in the athletic department. To be this bad, to give up 62 points to Coastal and 600 yards and, give up, I think, 7 touchdowns on the first 8 possessions. I don't know if this team has quit. I don't know if the message just isn't being sent. There's something more going on there than this team just really sucks. And I don't know what it is, and that's why I couldn't take UMass here, because it's got to be something more than just a talent deficiency.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say also, if you look at UMass's defense and how bad their numbers are, first of all, I liked you worked in UConn's defense from last year. Always nice to throw in one more nugget about how bad UConn's defense was last year. Not that they're really that much better this year, but I will say about UMass, they haven't exactly played good offensive teams so far this year. So you look at their schedule and you're thinking, I mean, what would happen if they actually really played good offenses? I'm not saying Akron is one, certainly, but, this UMass defense is really, really bad. I could only take overs with them. Gosh, if you take an under with UMass, you don't want to follow the game, that's for sure. So I would say that I think I would probably take the over first in this game. And while I'm saying these are my leans, I don't think I will play this game. It's hard to get involved in Akron and UMass.
There are 256 teams between Division 1A and Division 1AA that Jeff Sagarin ranks. UMass is 203rd out of 256 teams. So obviously there's a lot of Division 1AA teams ahead of them. Akron 172. So at least there's that. If you assume UMass has 0 home field advantage, which at this point is probably fair. I give them 2 points because it's the lowest I give. But I guess I give them 2.5 points. I give them anywhere from 2 to 4.5 this year. They have 2.5 points for me. That may be a little bit optimistic. So maybe I'm more like 5.5 here in this game if I take away that home field advantage. But, man, I don't remember a team this bad in my power ratings. And like I said, if Akron goes and blows them out with how the Zips have played this year, UMass is going to be a touchdown worse than anybody else, maybe 8.5 points worse than anybody else. And easily the lowest power-rated team I have ever had and quite possibly will ever have.
Yeah, and I have to say it's strangely kind of fun to talk about a game that sucks as much. It's just, it's easy to kind of pile on both teams, and at the same time, it is kind of interesting to talk about a game where, nobody else is going to talk about this game. You kind of think, why would you talk about this game? But games like this, sometimes you can find some good value. I think this one's a difficult one. Like I said, I would like the over if the number's right here. If you get something upper 50s or something, this might be a good over. But other than that, we'll find out who is really that bad. But both of these teams are terrible.
Well, I guess that's the last question here. We can touch on this real quickly. Where does this line go? You would think there won't be much public interest in it. At the same time, UMass is so bad that they may just be on auto fade for everybody. So I don't know if there's going to be sharp involvement in this game or not. There's a chance Akron becomes a public side, which, I mean, it makes me laugh because my alma mater are absolutely awful at football. But that's kind of the question I have. I mean, is anybody willing to take UMass, and at what price point? If this goes to 7, do you get some sharp group or some sharp individual out there that goes, I have to take this? I don't know. I mean, is 6 a good number to attempt to balance action? Does anybody care about betting on this game at all? That's kind of intriguing to me is, where does this number go, if anywhere?
I'm going to guess this number stays about the same. Maybe Akron minus 6.5. I think, if Akron's laying 7 points, it's hard to justify betting Akron because as bad as they've looked, how can you lay a touchdown on the road with that bad of a team? But, I don't think this one will get too much as far as the betting handle is. There's not going to be many bets made on this game. So you heard an analysis of this game here, and you probably won't hear another one this week.
I guess the last thing I would consider here is, I mentioned for UMass, if you don't win this game, you're probably not winning one. When you look at the rest of Akron's schedule, if they don't win this one, they may not win one. They're on the road at Bowling Green, on the road at Miami of Ohio, and they'll be a clear home dog in the rest of their home games. So, I mean, they may not win a game either. So, I guess there's that, too. You're going out there thinking, well, this may be our last chance at a win. So, I guess very important game here for both of these teams. Otherwise, they're staring at 0-12 seasons. Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at huntersportspicks.com. What's going on over there right now, man?
I'm going to do a special again, all football total. It's college football and NFL, every game the rest of the year. $575 this week if you mention the Bang the Book special. You can message me, Kyle at huntersportspicks.com or at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Again, that's every game through the title game and the Super Bowl. $575 for all totals. Total is definitely my specialty, especially in college football. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Also have the Free Picks newsletter, 81-49, last 130. Had Old Dominion this past weekend. I wish I'd have got that one a little bit bigger, honestly. I got a little bit worried for my Virginia season win total over later in that game when Old Dominion was winning outright. But Old Dominion covered nicely there. So if you haven't already signed up for the Free Picks newsletter, go to huntersportspicks.com and do that as well.
And like Kyle said, make sure you follow him on Twitter at Kyle Hunter Picks. Kyle Hunter, huntersportspicks.com. Appreciate the time as always, brother. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you again next week.
All right, thanks, man. Take care.